Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Ajahn and
Well, thank you for taking time for this session. Today is Thursday, December 30th, 2021. Today I'd like to ask you to say a few words about old age, as you seem to be living the experience in a very peaceful and accepting way. I know for a fact your eyesight is slowly going due to macular degeneration. Your hearing is not what it used to be. Your sense of balance can be difficult sometimes. But you don't seem to have be experiencing any form of frustration or upset because of the difficulties. And that's something that several people have remarked on. And it is very inspiring to witness. Could you say a few words about that, please?
Well, old age is something everybody's going to experience if they live long. And we all have to live with old people. Our parents get old. And as you get older, the physical side of yourself begins to age and degenerate, which is natural. And of course, then the Buddhist teaching is to see this, the body is impersonal, not to see it in terms of one's ownership and identity. So over the years in monastic life, and due to Lumparcha's teaching, and contemplates the body as a condition in nature and its natural movement towards middle age, old age, toward death. So by the time you're my age, you're well groomed for the aging process and the inevitable death of the body. So over the years, just contemplating, am I really this body? Just investigating, is this body really what I am? And then you reflect on the functions of it, the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, the body itself is all about sensitivity, about feeling, pleasure, pain, and then the mind with its turbulent attitudes towards pleasure and pain, and this contemplation, this reflective ability that we have to just notice the way it is. And in the early years in Thailand, when I caught malaria, I had malaria for about a year when I was a junior monk. And at first, I saw it in something that's bothering me, that I don't want, that it frightens me, and then the social, cultural conditioning I had around the word malaria was that it's a very deadly disease. You go to your brain, you can become crazy. It'll ruin your life. And so all these kind of memories of past information about malaria were making me very troubled about it. And so one day Lumparcha came to visit. I was at a branch monastery and I was complaining about how I can't get samadhi because I'm going through these malarial fevers and kind of whining and whinging about how I don't want this disease. And Lumparcha said, malaria is your meditation. So I took that to heart, because what Lumparcha said to me was always taken quite seriously. So I started stop whining and whinging and thinking, but just contemplating the actual reality of malarial fevers and how they arise and cease, and they go through cycles and they seem to disappear and then they occur again. And this lasted for about a year. And so I changed my attitude towards malaria to learn from it, to see it as an opportunity to witness it, rather than to own it or try to resist it or worry about it or create anxious states of mind. So I began to see certain pleasant aspects of it. For example, when the fever vanishes, you feel this incredible sense of coolness and relief, which is very pleasant. And then within a year, taking various drugs, what they were using in Thailand at that time was chloroquine, taking these chloroquine tablets, and eventually the malarial fever stopped. And it's never been a problem since. Well, that was many years ago. That was an experiment with disease. And then just by changing one's attitude towards it, like now with the COVID-19 pandemic, this is a disease that nobody wants. And we worry about it, we want it to stop, we get vaccinated, or we take medicine of some sort to kind of prevent wearing masks and all this. So that we develop a personal aversion and fear and anxious state of mind around the possibility of getting this very dangerous, quite deadly disease that is in the news constantly in the media. Wherever you read a newspaper or listen to the radio, they're talking about COVID pandemic. So changing the attitude towards that, towards observing how just the thought, just the information you get from the newspaper, the radio, or the television affects you like this. When you think of how many people, thousands of people died from the pandemic, and this is rather ominous news, and the effect it has on you it's frightening. And so, who is aware of fear? What is it that's aware of fear? Fear of a COVID pandemic depends on the conditions of the news and memory, but it comes and goes, where the awareness of it isn't frightened. You begin to trust the awareness rather than the habitual reactions or the fear that generates in your mind over this particular subject. Well, old age has its many advantages. For one thing, you're physically not capable of living like you did when you were young. And of course, living in Buddhist monasteries, like here in the UK, I'm living with mostly monks who are much, much younger than I am. So this is, they move about very quickly, and they have good eyesight and good hearing. and they can run about and get down on their knees and bow and sit in samadhi postures and so forth in ways that I can no longer manage. And you find yourself incredibly clumsy. The way you have to walk with I have to walk with a walking stick and depend on another monk to take me from my kuti to the temple, and then they prepare a special chair that I sit in, and I don't have to get down on my knees and bow because I'm so clumsy. Doing that is so difficult, so the Sangha has given me permission to just bow my head at the shrine. And so these, according to the young monk in myself, the way I was trained when I was young, or these became absolute necessities to bow in the right way and sit in with your legs in the proper position on the floor. And suddenly, you find your knees can't bend that well, and your body, to try to get down on your knees, you look so clumsy and foolish, and then you have to get up later, and several monks come rushing forth to help you up, and then this, to the young monk in me, this was I had memories of the past of proper training in the early years. Was that these kind of movements, these kind of ceremonies, and that were absolute necessities to perform properly and mindfully, and suddenly you can't do them. So this is also a subject for reflection, like you observing the early training, the kind of way one was trained as an early monk in Thailand, at Wat Pah Pong, and what it is like now is memory. It's a memory of what's proper, what's right, what's correct behavior, correct posture, and this is no longer possible. So, the memories come back, and you still feel this desire to perform these acts in the proper way, but you can't do it. So, just this awareness of that reality when it arises is enough. Come to make peace with life rather than trying to live up to standards that you acquired when you were a young monk, a young man, a young woman. And so old age has it, in some ways it's and the Sangha, the society doesn't expect you to perform, like a young monk anymore. So you feel, you have to see that the problem with being a man is that we suffer from male pride. Men, we've got to deal with this pride that most men have. And you don't want to look foolish, you don't want to look old, you don't want to look helpless. You want, the idea of being brave and strong and agile and athletic and all that are the way you were programmed when you were young. But old age is like this. So in this reference, way of referring to old age is like this, is not praising it or criticizing it, but it's accepting it. It's learning to accept, to realize the body is not personal, it's not what I really am. It's a condition in nature. Now this is December in England, and and sitting in my kuti, observing the changing of the seasons from autumn to winter, you're seeing the inevitable fading out of as the autumn leaves fall past your window, and they turn brown and they get wrinkled and they're different colors. And now, this very day, on Thursday, 30th December 2021, the trees around, most of the trees around the kuti are barren. So you're looking out at barren branches. And so December is like old age, it's, I think there are pop songs about autumn leaves and September song and that I remember hearing when I was young. And so just the changing of the year is a reflection, especially in UK where the seasons are so clear and different from one another. So you have spring, summer, autumn, and winter. So old age is like winter. The barren trees are not as beautiful as the trees in the springtime, and that's the way it is. But they have their own beauty. If you're not comparing them with springtime, they are what they are. And if you're comparing them with springtime, then you can complain about it, that I wish it were springtime all year round is a kind of foolish wish that we might have. But changing from wishing things were lived up to a certain standard of beauty and perfection that you might have in your mind, the changing conditions of life are like this. So in learning to accept the body as it ages, as its senses diminish, and the functions of the body are no longer, you can't function like a young monk, you're not agile anymore, and it's like this, and you're seeing it as natural phenomena doing what it's supposed to do, rather than some kind of personal identity as I'm an old man and seeing an old age and complaining and whining about it, befriending it. It's quite all right, when you really look at it as it is. Where if I just followed my condition, the way I was conditioned when I was young, then I would, say old age sucks. It's just, I wish I didn't have to get old or complain or wish or want to die young or whatever. You're aware of the mental states that arise. So this awareness is our refuge, is what we see as our true nature, that we can trust, that we can take, that we put our trust in, this awareness of the way it is. Where the thinking mind is critical, so when you're born, a newborn baby doesn't think about anything, doesn't have a language yet. So it's just spontaneous in its reactions to experience as a human form, conscious human form, but it isn't like wishing it were otherwise or blaming other people for its discomfort or problems. But it's just spontaneously responding to experience as it happens in the moment. And so old age is like returning to that kind of innocence, except the innocence of a baby lacks wisdom, and where the innocence of an old man has wisdom to guide it. So wisdom is knowing the way things are, the way it is, which is all conditions are impermanent, what arises ceases. And that Dhamma, or ultimate reality, is impersonal. So what is impersonal in this very present moment? What is something I can't think about or create or believe in as some kind of concept or doctrine or religious teaching, is awareness. It's spontaneous, it's here and now, it's always present. Conscious awareness is always whatever you're experiencing through the senses, pleasurable or painful. The awareness is still, pure aware. It's like this, where when you think about like a COVID pandemic as a person, then nobody wants it. I don't want it as a person. I'd like to get rid of COVID pandemic permanently, forever, as a person. That's my critical mind functioning. So that awareness, the difference between the personal and the non-personal, is the person I create. It's thinking, it's my thoughts. And they are about good and bad, right and wrong, heaven and hell, true and false. So they operate always in this very divisive, discriminative way of what's right and what's wrong, what is allowed, what is unallowed, and so forth. But awareness isn't critical. It's not condemning or praising any condition, any experience that you're having through the senses, but it is aware. It's like this. So training yourself over the years in this way of reflecting on the way it is makes old age in many ways, it's a relief. You know, I see it as a kind of holiday experience because much of my monastic life was, you know, being a teacher, being a preceptor, being the center of a monastic community, being, you know, being somebody, having duties, responsibilities, and then learning from that, seeing the suffering that one creates about taking leadership positions, working projects, and establishing monasteries and ordaining monks, ordaining nuns, and how the ego, how that, you know, if one is not aware, one creates an ego around being a preceptor, being an abbot of a monastery, being given a title by the king of Thailand. You know, you can create a whole persona around these perceptions. But in terms of bhavana, or right meditation, awareness of that. It's not that I never felt responsible as a person, because that particular word was very important in my upbringing. My parents were very responsible. My mother was responsible. My father was a very responsible man. And we were brought up to be responsible. And so this was a kind of condition sine qua non that permeated my experience of life. So, and being put in responsible positions, like when Luang Por Chah asked me to establish the Wat Bananachat monastery, a branch monastery near his monastery in Thailand, you know, then this whole sense of responsibility overwhelmed me, because suddenly I was, instead of being just a follower of Luang Por Chah, enjoying, kind of riding in the wake of Luang Por Chah, suddenly I was kind of kicked out and put in another place where I was expected to be a teacher and establish a branch monastery. You know, so this would bring up all this conditioning from early life about responsibility, which is good. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not that it was evil kind of conditioning, but it is conditioning. So the first year or so as abbot of Wat Nanachat, I suffered a lot. Can I really be responsible for this? Am I responsible enough? And any kind of problems that arose, I take personally as my responsibility to resolve them, and relationships with other monks and so forth, all the ups and downs that one experiences in that position was taken quite personally. And so the suffering was not about actually the position or the situation, but the habit patterns of conditioning that I was experiencing. And so one day I went to, you know, I was quite depressed by it, because I didn't feel I was ready for such a position. I felt inadequate and frustrated. So I went up to Luang Por Chah's monastery, which is walking distance, and he could see I was very upset, and so he kind of just laughed at me and said, "Sumedho, you think being head of a monastery is you just get to sit with a nice soft cushion behind your back?" Because that's what Thai abbots tend to have, with these triangular pillows that they can sit on. You don't have them when you're a junior monk. And so he was making fun of me. And so it did, you know, I could see the humor. It wasn't a vicious or malicious kind of humor. It was pointing to something important. So I figured when I left, I had to walk back, which took took several hours to walk from Wat Pong back to Nanachat. And I contemplated, what is it about Luang Por Chah that is so compelling, so unique. And I said, he is himself. He's not trying to be an abbot of a monastery or like Lumpu Man or anybody else. He is what he is, and he knows that. And he's absolutely comfortable in being what he is. And if he's in the position of being abbot of a monastery, then he's comfortable with that. So he still experiences crises in the monastery, misbehavior of monks and people complaining and unsympathetic other situations, being criticized by many other monks in the area and so forth. And he seemed totally at ease with all of this. And yet the responsibility of the monastery was never in question, but it wasn't a problem because he didn't make it one. So he could actually be responsible without taking it personally. And so this insight, I began to see that I needed to be who I am rather than trying to emulate Lumpur Cha or follow my ideals of what good habits of Thai monasteries are like, which I tended to do in the first year. Tended to, I should be like Lumpur Cha or other Ajahns I'd lived with that I admired. I tried to live up to this kind of standard that I held as an ideal. And I began to see I couldn't do it. I could never be Lumpur Cha. And when I tried to be, the other monks rebelled against me. They knew I was being a fake, that I was playing a role that wasn't what I was at all, so they couldn't take it seriously. So the problems were trying to become somebody, take on the role of the abbot, take on the role of a teacher, as I was conditioned by my own experience in life to regard these roles as from the ideal position, where the insight into Lumpur Cha was he's comfortable with who he is. He's not trying to be perfect abbot or perfect in every way. And this I felt, living close by Lumpur Cha, living with him, I always felt this sense of comfort around him because he was always comfortable in himself. I never felt he was trying to be somebody else or be even be a teacher or an Ajahn. And this is what was so pleasant about living with somebody like that was, most of my experience with life as a layperson was role-playing, acting roles, trying to pretend, trying to become something I wasn't, or trying to control myself, trying to suppress my feelings and being guilty about many things, feeling guilt because I was so imperfect as a person, a feeling that there's something wrong with me because I wasn't ideal, that I had an ideal of what I'd like to be. And I was given that ideal, through the way I was brought up as a Christian. And, it's a good ideal. Ideals are always perfect. But being human is like this. And so learning to accept one's humanity, the body is like this. This is a human body. And an old age is part of its experience if you live long enough. If you die young, then you don't have to go through it. But if you live, as old as I am now, you're experiencing old age in all its aspects, and it's like this. And any complaining about it, I don't feel complaining or resentful towards it. I feel at peace with it. It is the way it is, and I don't want it to be otherwise. and you find your real refuge. This refuge is in the awareness of the body, in which you no longer see it in a personal way. You know, it's like this, looking, the skin is like this, the wrinkles are like this, the fuzzy vision is like this, rather than wishing it were otherwise. So you just, you adapt to the necessities of life. As, the body ages, you let it, you try to take care of it, and you're not being heedless with it. So you're eating properly and exercising and doing necessary things that the body needs, even when it's old. So you're not kind of torturing it or resenting it. So this reflection on old age is you find it a kind of peaceful attitude. I find in old age the mind is very peaceful. It's just naturally peaceful. I don't need to create situations where everything is silent and perfect for me to be peaceful. It's peaceful even in the midst of a busy life, because that's its nature. Awareness is peaceful. Conscious awareness is peace itself, and it's incorruptible peace, where the conditions that I see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and feel through the body are seldom peaceful conditions. Conditions are not peaceful by nature because they change. So when you're thinking of peace as some kind of permanent condition, it can't be. It's not a condition. It's the reality of conscious awareness that's here and now. Whether you're young or old, it doesn't matter. It's still the same. So in terms of the Dhamma being not self, then this is Dhamma. This is the ultimate reality. This peaceful awareness in the present is Dhamma. It's the refuge in Dhamma, rather than some kind of idea of what Dhamma is or some abstract notion you have about it. It's no longer a notion. It's no longer some metaphysical ideal that you create with your thoughts, but it's the reality of awareness here and now.
Thank you very much.